You will alert me when we are live, or we are?
We are now live. You may start, please.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. My name is Noha El-Mikawy. I have the great pleasure of moderating today's session in ERF's 28th annual conference. This is our plenary session on the microeconomics of social protection, a topic very dear to my heart. I would just like very quickly to kick us off with a couple of remarks. Nothing that compares to what you will be hearing from our key speaker and lead commentators, but just to frame our conversation, at least from where I take it. I kick us off with a disturbing trend and some good news. Precarity is a prevalent feature of the lives of many, both employed and unemployed, unfortunately. And the World Bank estimates 700 million people worldwide who live below the poverty line. Many have no protection against loss of income due to illness, age, disability, or other life crises. But precarity is no longer a feature associated with those living under the poverty line. In fact, very many above the poverty line, in the millions, are now in precarious working conditions, and hence the topic of this session is absolutely crucial. According to the ILO, in its World Social Protection Report of 2022, 70% of 4 billion people have no coverage, or only partial coverage by social protection. That figure is really, really low in the MENA, 40%, and goes down to 17% in Africa. As alarming as that is, then the second question becomes the financing of social protection. And here is where people diverse in their opinion on how to finance sustainably social protection coverage. And within that context, social protection has become a galvanizing issue. Galvanizing in the sense that it appears in IMF World Bank reports, as well as it is an ILO priority, and is very much present in the SDGs and many localized national plans for 2030. The best news is that we have a fabulous panel of guests today. They will help us grapple with some key questions. How can MENA economies handle social protection? How to deliver social protection and do that in a holistic approach? We will be kicked off with 20 minutes with this presentation from Professor Insan Tonani, Professor Emeritus at Tufts University and an ERF Distinguished Fellow. And then we will be followed with 3 fantastic comments from 3 lead commentators. Vladimir Rasmi from UN ESPOIR, Professor Masoud Pershenas, Professor of Economics, Department of Economics, SOAS, and finally, Professor Mohamed Saeed, Professor of Economics, American University in Cairo. All of the distinguished panels have bios, and the hyperlinks will be put in the chat room. I'd rather have you go through the bios from the hyperlinks in the chat room, so to give them time to go ahead and start the presentation. There will be translation in Arabic, so you can adjust your interpretation button to listen to the translation in Arabic if you want to. And if you wish to make any comment or raise any question, either do that in the chat room, in the Q&A session, or raise your hand at the end of the session, and I will give you the floor when your mic is unmuted. The session is recorded and broadcasted live on ERF YouTube. And finally, I would like to turn it over to Professor Insan to start us off with his 20 minutes presentation. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to be the speaker on this plenary. I am very glad that the organizers invited me for the occasion, even though I am not really a social protection person. Those of you who know me know this, and those of you who don't know me will discover that. But I thought this was a good opportunity for me to talk about aspects of this problem that interests me. The assignment is very wide, so it should be possible to answer at least one of these questions in some way, and I hope that I'll be able to do that. Now, social protection has been on the ERF agenda for some time, and perhaps increasingly so in recent years, given what the world was going through. Some of these questions were the subject of ERF webinars held in January with focus on Jordan and Tunisia. A macro perspective was offered yesterday in another special plenary. Now, I will give you an introduction of sorts and provide you a sense of how I will pursue my assignment. Now, the need for social protection is obviously well understood. Sizable fractions of citizens in the developing world share these many problems that they have difficulty coping with. And there's a wide range of objectives that countries pursue to tackle these issues. These objectives are easily understood, and the tools are wide-ranged, and so are the labels. Now, as a labor economist, I'm going to focus on labor market interventions and see how they fare in terms of the social protection provided to their targets. Now, the literature is really vast. I don't have to tell you that. My takeaway from this literature is that the emphasis on targeting is important, that social protection can create incentive problems, and also formulation of social protection directed to informal workers. Agenda item 1 that I shared with you is challenging because informality involves hiding. Here, I will take informality to mean lack of access to social security benefits and define informal workers a bit more narrowly among wage and salary workers who are not formally covered by some form of social security. Now, as I was preparing for my assignment, I looked around to discover what fraction of wage and salary earners in the MENA region were informal, and realized that this information was unavailable for many countries. I sought the help of some of my colleagues who have done this kind of stuff, so found some numbers which I hope to put to use. Now, as I told you, I'm not an expert on social protection. I've done a little bit of work on it. That's item number 1 on this page. But I will also be focusing mostly on 2 and 3, my work on minimum wages and on the unemployment insurance system in Turkey. Now, you might say, well, what do they have to do with social protection of the type described on the agenda? I hope I'll be able to convince you that the link is there. Now, all of this is collaborative work, but of course, I want to thank my collaborators for helping me shape my views, but these are my views, what you'll be hearing today. Now, My assignment gave me the opportunity to assemble some evidence from the work that we did for the government back in 2009 and 10. This was part of an effort to draft a national employment strategy compatible with Turkey's bid to join the EU. Now, in that context, the employment social protection connection was what intrigued me. And as we looked at the literature in the context of actually the institutions in the context of Turkey, we saw that the benefits were often canceled upon formal employment, which of course provided a disincentive for accepting formal employment. In particular, the Green Card program that ensured free access to medication prescribed by physicians was canceled. Now, Turkey moved away from this, found smart ways of dealing with the disincentive issue. But these types of problems are there. In the USA, I learned that informal employment is tolerated in case of some forms of welfare support because it's understood that if you don't do that, you may end up with outcomes which are inferior. Now, in 2010, the employment agency in Turkey took some of the ideas which were in our report and implemented in a project undertaken around that time. In particular, a task that they focused on was distinguishing between employable and not employable individuals in the subpopulation receiving social assistance. Now, the idea was if they're employable, activation will follow. Now, this is of course easier said than done. To give you some sense of the difficulties, in 2015 they did an evaluation of their work and reported that 3 million households that received social assistance was approached. They registered 400,000 employables from these 3 million households. So that's probably 12 to 15 million people. Directed 190,000 of these to vacancies and subsequently reported that 53,000 were employed. So this is like searching for a needle in a haystack, but then the effort does produce some positive outcomes. Now, during that work, I also discovered a wonderful handbook for social protection, as I come to call it, about safety nets. The citation is given below my slide. And what I like about this is that it's on the rows, looking at the first column, identifies different groups. In the columns, it talks about policy, and then in the intersection, various things emerge. Most importantly, the recognition that need varies with life cycle is something that is worth keeping in mind, and tools obviously vary with needs. Now, note that informal workers are not explicitly shown under group served, so they probably are under working poor. There are references of them in the report as recipients of social assistance. Now, there are two circles, so to speak, in this box. They will be of some importance in my presentation. So what do? I use data from Turkey to first examine the trends in formalization, and if I have time, also look at the drivers of this change. To locate informal workers among the labor market strata and examine how they fare relative to formal workers. I'll do this very briefly, but I think it's very important for what's to come. I will mostly focus on two labor market institutions that serve vulnerable formal workers and evaluate how well they function. Finally, I'll comment on interactions between formality and informality. This will be brief. And in the end, I will conclude that formalization is a worthy objective that enhances social protection and has spillovers for those who are not covered. So that's what you get from a labor economist. I'm not a social protection person, so this is my angle on it. Now, I will end my presentation by commenting on an apparent paradigm shift in the best approach to social protection. Turkey has seen some remarkable employment growth in the 15 years or so that I am keeping track of in this slide. Employment growth exceeded the growth rate of the working age population. On the left axis here, you have levels, total employment in millions. On the right axis, you have fraction. The orange line keeps track of the fraction of wage and salary employees. And note that this increased dramatically from 56% to 71%. So this says something about the transformation that's going on in the labor market. Now, let me also briefly tell you that these are quarterly data, and you see some fluctuations. These fluctuations are mostly attributable to other forms of employment. So in the labor market, obviously, there's a lot of churning, and we have to be aware of that. And in fact, that's probably why social protection becomes so important. Now, excuse me, if we look at the composition of wage and salary employment, what's most remarkable is that the formal share increased from about 67 to 83% during this time. And that's the black line at the very top. Actually, this number is up to 2019, first quarter, before I should have said 2020 quarter one, before COVID, because interesting things were happening in the labor market at that time. So the things seem to be moving in the right direction on this slide. If we look at the dynamics to make some sense of what's going on behind this growth, what I want to do is distinguish between formal employment on the top panel and informal employment in the bottom panel. Both of these are wage and salary employment. The blue bars show us year-to-year changes, and the red bars show us quarterly changes. Now, if you look at the formal case, you see the blues dominate, and they're positive. And that's what's behind the trend in increase of wage and salary employment we saw on the previous graph. Now, let me remind you that the y-axis, the vertical axis, has the same scale in these two graphs. So when we move down to the informal case, we see that the numbers are a bit less, but dominated by reds, these quarterly changes. So there's a lot more volatility in the informal labor market. I marked two episodes. The yellow one shows the spillover from the global crisis between 2008-9 to Turkey, and the green one shows the COVID period. Now, so we saw there's a lot of churning in the labor market. Formal and informal sector workers are both susceptible to economic crises. Volatility is higher in the informal segment. It was larger during the global crisis, 2008-9 compared to other periods, but largest during the height of COVID-19. Now, there are some transitions between these two states. That's what I look at in the figures at the bottom of this slide. The first one shows individuals who start as formally wage and salary employed, and more than 80% of them are still formally wage and salary employed a year later. In the second box, we have those who start as informally wage and salary employed, and notice the persistence figures is about 60% there. The transitions can be seen between the first two boxes. You see that it's rare, the informal to formal transition is rare, and the formal to informal transition is very rare. All right. So we saw that informal is enhanced vulnerability, and formalization reduces vulnerability. There are many programs directed to formal workers exposed to employment shocks. I mentioned some of them here. It's important to realize that these provide incentives for preferring formal employment over informal employment. And perhaps the success of what was happening on the formal employment side is what fed into this growth in the formal share. Now, I told you I would look at the labor market very briefly to frame things. Here, I look at different segments. This is really a 2 by 2 by 2 breakdown. Red and green lines refer to the two sexes. And I've got formal sector on the left-hand side, informal sector on the right-hand side, private at top, and public at the bottom. Now, you look at these and you immediately realize that there are different segments, and the needs of these segments are going to be different. I'd like to note that the y-axis scale varies, so it kind of complicates interpretation. What's perhaps most important for my argument is that the informal sector has a distribution of wages as well. If you look at the individuals around the minimum wage line, which is the red line, you see that there's a healthy fraction of informal sector workers around that and above it as well. So how does this happen? Well, if you look at the same picture over time, you see how it is happening. As the minimum wage increases, there are spillovers to the informal workforce. So the main takes then are, apart from patterns that we know about gender gaps in public sector premium, we see the sizable fraction of informal employees are earning around minimum wage or above. There are spillovers of private informal earnings to private informal earnings as a result of minimum wage increases. And we know from the literature on minimum wage that these institutions create compression, and we see evidence of that in Turkey as well. Let me close my door. There's another event. Now, minimum wage policy in Turkey has been around for some time. The episode that we study is actually 2005 to 2018. And what we see are regular increases. So the blue lines are showing us the levels of the nominal net minimum wage. The darker blue lines show us the dating of the increases. So notice that in the middle period, there are two raises in the year. And this helps in terms of keeping the value of the real minimum wage, which is tracked by the orange line in the same graph. The magnitudes are shown on the right-hand side axis. So we see that inflation erodes the value of the minimum wage, and this has particularly been the case since 2016. Now, one of the aims of our project was to assess employment effects of the minimum wage changes, and very quickly, let me summarize that. We found almost no adverse employment effects. We looked at many outcomes. So if we take this and put it in the broader context of the labor market in Turkey, one thing that Turkey shares with other MENA countries is a low employment population ratio, a high dependency rate, age dependency rate. And in the Turkish context, we also saw a very large minimum wage footprint, meaning very high fraction of wage and salary earners are at or below the minimum wage. So this means that minimum wage policy influences a very large segment of the population. By some estimates around 2015, when a large increase took place, 6 to 7 million workers, and 15 to I have to close this box, 15 to 20 million individuals. Now, if we remember that employment income is the main determinant of poverty, you realize how important minimum wage policy is in a country like Turkey. So my take from this is that frequent and prudent increases of the minimum wage appears to be a good policy for protecting a large vulnerable segment of the population. All right. The second institution I wanted to talk about was the unemployment insurance system. So let me try to do that as fast as I can. Now, we know what the unemployment insurance system aims. It wants to make sure that skills are not eroded, and workers find jobs as soon as possible. We also know from the broader literature that generous unemployment benefits can create re-employment disincentives. A moral hazard problem appears to be there. Now, the UI system in Turkey is somewhat frugal. When you compare it with Western counterparts, you see the stipulations for eligibility are very strict and the benefits are low. Nonetheless, if you look at the diagrams I'm sharing with you, more than half the individuals collecting UI benefits use them fully. There are 3 pictures there because we're looking at people conditional on the potential benefit duration, which is awarded to them on the basis of premia they paid while employed. Now, the first hump is showing us a rise in the hazard followed by a decline, and this is typically attributed to heterogeneity in the job search literature, the best exit first. The second hump is what's known as the wake-up call, and the question is whether this is evidence of moral hazard. Now, can we implicate the magnitude and or duration of the UI benefit payments? To answer this question, we examine causal effects of potential benefit duration change and benefit amount change through quasi-experimental methods. We do a regression discontinuity exercise around 900. An individual who has up to 900 days of premium payments is able to collect unemployment benefits for 180 days. But if someone has 901 days, that person has 240 days. So that's a boost of 2 months. So we do a regression discontinuity analysis around this point 900. Now, the fact that we're working with duration data and the support is different. Some people have 180 days, others have 240, complicates matters. And we have a way of resolving it. The second experiment we do is on the amount. This diagram shows you the relationship between unemployment benefits and the pre-unemployment wage of the individual. Note that it is 40% of the wage up to twice the minimum wage and then remains at 80% of the minimum wage beyond that. Now, when you have kinks of this sort, and when you also remember that there's a connection between minimum wage and benefits, this provides us with an opportunity to diff analysis. So the first one, the regression discontinuity exercise around APP 900, shows us that there is very weak evidence in favor of moral hazard. In males, for a particular type of termination, and these are employee initiated, we see that these account for 3% of the whole sample. And also in the case of females, type D fixed term contracts ended, that's the reason for termination. They account for less than 5% of the sample. So basically, there is very little evidence of moral hazard. Now, if I have time, I can come back and show you how this evidence is put together, but in the interest of time, allow me to proceed. The second experiment, the diff and diff, answers the question, does the boost in the unemployment insurance benefits induced by the minimum wage increase, slow down exit rates to employment? So recall that the Kint graph, the red version shows what it looks like after a minimum wage increase. Remember, minimum wage increases are frequent. They essentially come at the end of the year. People who are terminated in December 31st, on December 31st and January 1st can collect different benefits. So we break this diagram into three ranges and do a standard treatment control analysis and find no evidence in favor of moral hazard. So what's the conclusion from this? Well, we looked at two aspects of the UI system and found that the evidence in favor of moral hazard is very, very weak. So this has policy implications. The Turkish system, which I told you is very frugal, has a lot of room for expansion. There's really no excuse not to expand it to cover more vulnerable workers, workers who have been continuously employed for less than 600 days. And there is good reason to increase the benefit duration as well as the amount during times of crisis. These are policy issues that should be considered. But unfortunately, the government has shied away. Now, the take then from my analysis of two institutions is that these directed to formal wage and salary workers have a social protection role that covers wide segments of the workforce. So I think it would be a very good idea to aim for formalization. How Turkey did that is a carrots and sticks approach. If we have time, I'll come back to it. And then design protection for formal wage and salary workers who fall through the cracks. Now, I mentioned what these are. So in a setting where informality is low, which is the Turkish case, and formality has been going up, these surely sound like great ideas. Now, when I looked at the region, I realized that a lot of the countries, all the countries are on the slide, as far as I can tell. The institutions are present in many of the countries. Minimum wage is there, some sort of unemployment benefit insurance system is there, and the last column, national health insurance, is there. Now, of course, a system being there doesn't mean it functions well. So I think it would be a very good idea to look at these institutions and evaluate how they function. Now, when I looked at the data from MENA a little more broadly, here I only am reporting a subset, but I have assembled the data for the entire region, and I'd be happy to share them with you. What I see is evidence of heterogeneity, right? Not surprising. I mean, there are similarities, but there's a lot of heterogeneity. Here I have some of the bigger countries. There's smaller countries. The demographics is different. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but except to say that there are really extremes in either sense. And there are countries like Iran where the demographic transformation has taken place very quickly. Now, so obviously the numbers there tell us something about where people are in their life cycles, and the country's needs will be very different depending on the share of the population in various age brackets. In the latter part of this table, I have labor market indicators. And again, we see quite a bit of difference. For example, unemployment rate is 9.5% in Morocco in the last decade. In Tunisia, it's 16%. Likewise, employment rate shows a variation. Turns out Turkey has the highest employment rate in the last decade. There are wide differences in terms of ag share, in terms of wage and salary share. So obviously, one size fits all policy is not a recommendation I would stand behind. These have to be tuned for the needs of the country. All right, so let me transit to my closing arguments. When I looked at this handbook published in 2008, it was full of references to conditional transfers being the way to conduct social protection. And this, of course, shouldn't come as a surprise to a microeconomically trained audience. Now, when I look at the recent version of this published in 2020, what I see is that the emphasis has changed. I'm sharing with you a very nice diagram that I think summarizes the challenges from social protection very well. In the vertical axis, we've got targeting issues captured. In the horizontal axis, conditionality issues, and moving front and back, the mode of transfer. Now, obviously, World Bank recognizes that different tools are needed depending on the nature of the group being served. But what's most amazing is that one of these cubes is colored differently, universal basic income. And there is a lot of emphasis on universal basic income as being the way to go. The future of social protection lies there. And of course, this is a huge simplicity given the complexity of this diagram. Now, to close my presentation, let me share with you this quote from Larry Summers. I had the chance to hear him in a webinar early on during the COVID crisis. He says, in general, economic thinking has privileged efficiency over resilience, and it has been insufficiently concerned with the big downsides of efficiency. Now, of course, we've heard that again and again throughout the pandemic, and we all understand that it resonates with the way most of us feel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Insan. This has been quite an interesting and powerful kickoff of our conversation.
Am I the one having trouble?
What trouble do you have? Tell me. Hello? Can the organizers let me know if I am being heard by everybody?
We can hear you. I think Dr. Insan might not be hearing us. Dr. Insan, can you hear us? Yes? You're on mute now, but you're on.
I can hear you now, but my audio was turned off. I'm so sorry because I was switching between two devices.
No problem.
Maybe Noha was trying to stop me and I conveniently did not hear it. I'm sorry about that.
I was not trying to stop you at all. I was completely immersed in everything you were saying, Professor. That was an excellent kickoff. Excellent kickoff. I see questions are coming in the Q&A session. I'm taking note of these questions. Please hold on until we get our lead commentators to give their interventions, and then we'll open up for the questions as they have come in the same order. I have the pleasure to turn the floor now to Vladimir Hilasny from UN Esquire. Vladimir, please go ahead and give your maximum of 10 minutes intervention.
Here we go. I hope you can hear me well and you can see the slides. Oops. Somebody please confirm that you can see and hear well.
Yes, everything is great. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So, like Insan, I have to admit I am not a social protection expert or even an advanced thinker, and so I deal more with labor economic issues or welfare issues, inequality, poverty, and in the Arab region. And so my presentation will be a little bit skewed toward that angle. Social protection experts among us may find some shortcomings in my presentation. So actually, it's a good thing that I am the first discussant, so that first of all, I preempt my other colleagues with showing some interesting stylized facts from the region. And second, if I say anything wrong or stupid, please, you have a chance to correct me. So thank you very much, Insan, for a very interesting PowerPoint set of slides and a very useful presentation. There was a lot of material from the global perspective and on the situation in Turkey. Again, I haven't worked on Turkey myself, so instead I will show some information about social protection programs in the Arab region, and I hope that some of that this will complement what Insan has been presenting, I think rather neatly, and at the end I will say something about some thoughts on which way the social protection system in the Arab region should go, what is the ESCWA's position, and some specific recommendations on that. Okay, let me see if I can. I always struggle a little bit with Zoom. Here we go. Okay, so first, Insan has been mostly talking about the issue of about the labor market and the issue of formality versus informality. So this, among the different social protection programs that we see, fits more with the contributory type of programs, such as social insurance that Insan has mentioned repeatedly. On that front, just some stylized facts on the degree of informality in the region. Insan has mentioned it at the end of his presentation, but here, at least graphically, I present some of the recent facts. So in a small selection of Arab countries, we can see that the share of informal workers among all workers is rather high. Especially we can see it in Mauritania. Oh, just one second, okay. And one interesting fact is that when we compare men and women, we see that the rate of informality is lower among men than, informality is lower among women than among men, which, but this just masks the fact that women have an altogether different problem, which is the being discouraged and kept out of participating in the labor market. So this slide shows some more stylized facts where we see kind of the true scale of the problems between genders. And we see that even though the ratio of formal to informal might look better for women than for men, it's the non-participation in the labor market in this graph, especially in Yemen. I hope. Let me just. Apologies. Here we go. Zoom always puts little windows on my screen. Okay. In Yemen, we see a huge, 94% of women out of the labor force, 35% of men out of the labor force. So this puts a little bit of kind of caveat on whether it's enough just to look at employed workers and what kinds of employment categories we need to consider. Okay. The silver lining is that the situation is improving over time. So on this slide, I show one particular type of social assistance, old age pensions. And when we look at the beneficiaries across several Arab countries over time, we see that the ratio is improving toward women as more women are entering formal and the various kinds of employment sectors and positions where they are eligible for participating in pensions. Okay, but this is not the case in all countries. So as Insan mentioned, the data we have, especially at the micro level, are very scarce, and we have various kinds of disaggregation for various countries, not systematically across all countries and over time. So here we can say something a little bit more about Egypt, and we see a negative trend where economically inactive among women rate is increasing toward recent years. While if we look carefully at the ratio of formal to informal, we would see that it's rather stagnating. There's not that much movement between these two groups of women. Okay, now let me talk just a little bit, again, some stylized facts on the non-contributory social assistance programs. Again, showing the ratio of men to women among beneficiaries of selected programs in Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Again, we see kind of a wrong-sided effect that women benefit more from many of these programs. One interpretation is that, well, it's the female households which might be poorer, more deprived than male households. And the second, some programs are specifically targeting women, or they allocate the funds from the programs to female household members. So, for example, we see that in Morocco, there's an example of a DAM program where over time, the enrollment in this program increased dramatically. And this could be, this information here could lead to what we found on the previous slide, that because of programs like this, the female ratio among beneficiaries tends to be high. A little bit more on the trend of social assistance programs and cash transfers over time, especially as we get to the COVID era. In Egypt and in Mauritania, we see great increases over time, especially in the year 2020. Jordan, somewhat of an uptick in 2020. Palestine, not an increase, and Tunisia also we don't see an increase of cash assistance under COVID, at least in the first year of COVID. Just one last example from Morocco. Again, I'm struggling a little bit with the Zoom controls, so apologies for the non-smooth transitions. In Morocco, here I wanted to show two things. First, we see that So like in the previous slides, we see that the participation or the there is horizontal, we can say horizontal expansion in the prevalence of social assistance programs. The rate of participation increased from 54% of workers in year 2002, going to all the way to 81% in 2017, where we don't have any more recent data. And I think what is also useful here, we can disaggregate by the type of specific programs that workers signed up for and received benefits from. So you could sign up for benefits as a non-agricultural employee, self-employed, workers on low revenues. And I think what is interesting to see is that this this distribution has changed over time, systematically and dramatically. For 75% of beneficiaries were standard non-agricultural, you could think as formal employees, and the yellow, only 1 or 2 percentage points were workers on low revenues, which might be thought of kind of as a proxy for informal workers, while in the most recent year, in 2014, we see that only 1/2 are these standard non-agricultural employees. Here we have something like almost 10% of workers, which could be thought of as informal. We also see an increase in, I believe, maybe the self-employed see a little bit of uptick over time. Okay, so significant expansion in the number of beneficiaries, and also expansion in terms of economic strata. You can think that this is going downward, that we're picking up more than just formally employed workers and getting into the informal or lower economic groups of workers. Okay. Let me.
Ademir, I hope you can help us wrap up as soon as you conveniently can, please.
Yes. Okay. So let me, oops, just 1 second. These slides don't work. Let me summarize the trends that we saw before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID in just 1 minute. So generally, what Insan has been saying, and this is a picture to illustrate that only well-positioned formal workers are eligible and participate in certain social programs, such as the contributory social insurance. At the bottom, we have poverty targeting programs, such as cash programs. And we've been having this missing middle, which are the informal workers. Now, one thing that this graph is missing is the general subsidies, which we can think that they're universal, but again, they benefit the richer, higher consumption households more than poor households. Okay. During a crisis, what we saw, so the contributory program stayed essentially the same. At the bottom, we see some increase in terms of monetary benefits that beneficiaries receive, and also certain expansion of coverage to higher income groups. And for the rest of the population, the informal workers, Arab countries have been implementing emergency programs. Okay, now the way forward, we have to somehow get rid of this missing middle, even after this the emergency programs are removed. And so there are essentially, we can think 3 ways to do it. One is expand the targeted social assistance to cover the informal workers, or only increase the eligibility for the contributory social insurance. Or what I show on this slide is that use a combination, coordinate the two types of systems to make sure continuous coverage and the complementarity between them, so that even the middle group will receive some benefit from contributory as well as from the non-contributory targeted social assistance. One slide here on Jordan, again showing evidence from the midst of COVID. In Jordan, in the year 2020, cash transfers to informal workers were greatly expanded. They were more significant in their effect on households than the pre-COVID Takaful 1 program. In the meanwhile, Takaful program was slightly increased in the year 2020, then it was slightly increased in the year 2021. The question is, what happens in the following years? Well, there is an indication that the cash transfers will be decreased or removed, and the hope is that this Takaful program will stay or increase to make up for this shortfall. Last slide from me, just quickly on targeting. Insan mentioned toward the end of his presentation the different types of targeting, universal or poverty targeting, or special programs. And here I wanted to make several recommendations. One, to target households who are in some type of poverty or deprivations correctly. We need good and better data than we currently have. ESQA is also recommending not to restrict ourselves to the existing proxy means tests, but to supplement them using our information on multi-dimensional deprivations at households, using something like the multi-dimensional poverty indices, because they might be better positioned to gauge the various overlapping deprivations, not just money metric, but deprivations in terms of household conditions, infrastructure in the neighborhood, human capital, and so on. And we can think that, well, this is particularly an important idea because we want to see households graduate from recipiency of social assistance programs. And so we don't want to treat just symptoms, the deprivations and poverty, but we would like to treat the causes, such as the lack of human capital, opportunities, capabilities of the chronically deprived households. Thank you so much.
Vladimir, thank you very much. And sorry that I had to ask you to wrap up, but we do have two further excellent speakers, and then I'm very curious and eager to open up the conversation with our audience. I would like now to turn the floor to Professor Emeritus Masoud Kershanas from SOAS University of London. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. El-Mikawy. Well, to keep to my 10 minutes allotted time, I dispense with the PowerPoint and read from my prepared text. Well, it is a great pleasure indeed to participate in this session on the microeconomics of social protection, along with Insan Tunali and other colleagues, Vladimir and Mona. Insan's work on labor markets in the MENA region has always been inspirational, and it is always a pleasure to be a part of a panel with him. Insan centers his analysis of the microeconomics of social protection on labor market institutions, which I think is the correct starting point in economies such as Turkey and most other MENA countries, where a majority of workers, more than 2/3, are wage and salary earners. With maybe 2 or 3 exceptions, all other MENA countries have a similar or higher wage and salary earning share of the labor force. Insan specifically focuses on 2 labor market institutions, namely the minimum wage and unemployment insurance, and argues that both these institutions, when used prudently, can be important elements of social protection for workers in the formal sector, without adversely affecting employment and causing unemployment or prolonging unemployment spells. He even suggests that in Turkey, the upward move of the minimum wage helped increase formality, which may appear counterintuitive. He also reflects on the implications for other MENA countries and discusses other forms of social protection, including the move from targeting to universal basic income. Here in my limited time, I briefly reflect on some of the possible implications of Insan's findings for other countries in the MENA region. But before that, I would like to say a word about the equity and efficiency aspects of labor market institutions discussed by Insan. This session is about social protection, and therefore Insan has focused on the equity aspects of institutions like unemployment insurance and minimum wages. Such labor market institutions also play an important role in enhancing efficiency and productivity in market economies. There is a large theoretical literature ranging from efficiency wage theories to monopsony models, which suggest a positive relationship between the minimum wage, when appropriately set, and efficiency and productivity, with increasing empirical support for such a positive relationship. Similarly, unemployment insurance plays an important efficiency role by facilitating labor mobility and improving the matching of skills with jobs. In a study of social policy and economic development in the Middle East that I led in the early 2000s for the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, UNRIS, one of the findings was that a main reason for the lack of success of liberalization policies in the region was the lack of appropriate labor market institutions necessary for well-functioning market economies. The work of Insan shows that Turkey, which is one of the more successful economies in the region, has partially addressed some of the institutional shortcomings in this regard. How generalizable are the findings in the case of Turkey for other MENA countries? I will cover here only the minimum wage issue because almost all countries in the region have established minimum wages, but unemployment insurance schemes, even when they exist, have a very low coverage as yet. And of course, also we don't know much about them. Insan's findings on the effect of the minimum wages in Turkey are not dissimilar to the findings of the impact of minimum wages in other OECD countries. Minimum wage increases, when appropriately set, have no cascading effect on wages in upper quantiles of distribution and hence have little inflationary effect. There is little evidence of adverse employment effects, and indeed minimum wage increases reduce earnings inequality. These results are contingent on wage bargaining processes in the economy to be relatively decentralized and independent of the national minimum wage. This is not necessarily the case in all the MENA economies. An example at one extreme is the case of Iran, where minimum wages are set as a part of a highly centralized pay negotiations where official pay scales are updated annually along with and in the same proportion as the minimum wage. This amounts to a centralized wage indexation system, which results in significant cascading effect of the minimum wage on all the upper quantile of wage distribution, a high correlation between the minimum wage and inflation, increasing pay inequality, resulting from growing distance between the wages of the formal and the informal labor, and significant unemployment effects and growing informalization. The wage setting institutions in the rest of the MENA region are likely to be situated between the two poles of the Turkish case and the Iranian case. Hence the importance of conducting country-specific analysis of wage setting institutions in each country prior to the understanding of the role of the minimum wages on wage employment outcomes and social protection. I'll mention a few additional comments and questions on the Turkish case. One, it may be true that the trends in the minimum wages and earnings equality move together in Turkey, but the causal effect of the minimum wage on inequality needs to be explicitly tested, taking into account the collective bargaining processes in the public and the private sectors which seem to me to behave very differently based on Insan's wage density graphs. 2, the concentration of a large proportion of the private formal sector earnings at or near the minimum wage is unexpected and a cause of concern. Can this be due to the formalization subsidies that the government gives to the private sector employers combined with increasing minimum wages? 3, it would be good to give some idea of how the minimum wage compares with the poverty line. A large section of the workers in the private formal sector seem to be vulnerable, and hence the need for other social protection measures. 4, the low labor force participation in MENA region may well be due to wage setting processes. Comparison of the minimum wage with poverty line can also help in examining this hypothesis. Minimum wages should not be confused with family wages, which seem to be the case in the labor codes in some of the countries that I know of. In some countries, minimum wages are 2 to 3 times higher than the poverty line, and this can cause low labor force participation, both for men and women. 5, projecting the past into the future can be hazardous, given the fast technological changes that are taking place with the rise of the gig economy. Insan pictures a future with a growing share of wage and salary workers with formal contracts. The gig economy is fast changing the picture and blurring the distinction between self-employment and wage employment with formal contracts and its usual entitlements. The rapid growth of zero-hour contracts, temporary agency work, and piecework in platform economies seems to portray a different path. The Uber case in the UK and the introduction of new contractual category of dependent worker, etc., suggests a more complicated future trajectory of work. The job for life with a fixed occupational identity and clear employment conditions is being undermined and replaced by multiple jobs and piece payments. The future of work can be very different from the past. And it is in this context that ideas about universal basic income are gaining ground. I just make a final point about the universal basic income. But it's a big topic, but I just refer to Insan's last comments. Well, Insan seems to interpret this as a move away from efficiency considerations in favor of equity. This is not the case. Many orthodox economists and conservative think tanks support universal basic income precisely on the efficiency grounds, as it does away with minimum tax thresholds and welfare subsidies, which they believe to be inefficient. My comments are meant to convey the thought-provoking nature of Insan's work, as well as the significance of labor market institutions in MENA, the study of which has benefited from his own contributions on Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Masoud. I find this to be quite a complementary and equally powerful contribution. Whereas Vladimir reminded us of the missing middle between the contributory and the cash transfer programs, whether conditional or non-conditional, and this missing middle is actually increasing. It helped us appreciate even more our key speakers' focus on labor market policies. And then Professor Masoud's comments came in very poignantly to raise some extremely important issues around replicability, given that the Turkish economy is not where other economies in the region are, and given raising questions that are extremely poignant all the way until his very last point about the future of work, and the future of social protection, precisely because of the gig economy and its implications. I cannot thank the three of you enough. We have one more contribution, and then we'll open the conversation. I invite now Professor Mona Said, Professor of Economics at the American University in Cairo, to give us her last intervention. And please, Professor Mona, try to stay within the 10 minutes.
I will. I have a PowerPoint, but I will whiz through it instead of just reading. I wonder if you can see, because I'm trying to go to make it like what do you call it? I'd like to make it like a slideshow, and
we can see it very well, and your icon is down there. Yes, I think you.
I think yes. I'm able to do it now. Right, it will help in the whizzing to go. It's a great pleasure. Can you see my slideshow now as a slideshow?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, right. It's a great pleasure, of course, to be with you, Noha, and with my mentors and great colleagues, Insan and Masoud. And with, I've been reading with a lot of interest the work of Halsani, and it's really, of course, an honor to be here. So I listened carefully to what, to all the contributions, and I think I share with them the fact that I'm a labor economist. I apologize for not being, focused on just social protection. In fact, I find that this panel probably is more rather than being one of the micro foundations, because micro foundations is about individual and firm behavior. It's mostly about the distributional aspects using micro data. Tremendous work has been done, and I want to call attention actually to some work done by ERF in collaboration with the Ford Foundation, with the ILO, that really sheds a lot of light on that. Because this panel is concerned about the heterogeneity of the beneficiaries from social policies. The male-female divide, the formal, informal, the national refugee. Didn't say much about the latter. I tried to say one word or two. But basically, I want to structure my comments on this excellent presentation by saying that actually, I agree with what it has. I just want to add a few things. So I want to structure it by answering the questions that were posed. So first question was, how can MENA economies ensure social protection reaches the informal economy? And my proposed response is just simply in 2 words: structural transformation. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And this is what I learned from the Turkish experience, I think. If we want to generalize it or get lessons for other Arab countries, especially in North Africa and Jordan, where some work has been done. The second question, how can the delivery of social protection be improved for all beneficiary? And here, I propose that we need to address labor market segmentation by gender and by formality that existed really before the pandemic, but was exacerbated and became clear. And finally, the third question about how can states adopt a more holistic approach in social protection? I think a lot has been said in this panel and the other, but I want to shed some lights on design issues in minimum wages or minimum social floors, and I'll try to say all of those very quickly and whiz through the PowerPoint as I said. The presentation argument, Insan's presentation argument using data from Turkey, was that formalization is a worthy objective and it has spillover effects for those even who are not, for example, in receipt of minimum wages. He used data also from MENA at the end to show the heterogeneity in size, the demographic dynamics, labor market indicators, and argued that one size should not fit all. However, his policy advice remains for using the carrot and stick approach for formalization, using labor market institutions such as minimum wage adjustments, unemployment insurance, and then trying to protect or find design in the programs to protect those who fall through the crack. So I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just trying to maybe bring some more findings. And I should acknowledge here that I had to do a bit of homework. So my argument on structural transformation, I used a very good report done between the ERF and the ILO in 2021 on jobs and growth, on labor market segmentation, especially during the pandemic. We have even presentations in this conference and a series of ERF policy briefs by Kraft, Assad, and Marouni, several ones, and then Aygun and Koksal and Aysel in Turkey. And there was one specifically on women by Barsoum and Majbouri. And finally, on this holistic approach to social protection and the minimum wages or minimum social floors, I think we should call attention also to a Ford Foundation funded grant to the ERF on a new social contract reimagining social protection in Jordan and Tunisia that Kraft and Hanafi will get a paper published out from soon. Now, on structural transformation, I think there is a lot of evidence that Turkey's move from an inegalitarian corporatism, where both the rural population and the informal urban employees were excluded, to a much more formal social security system that has minimum wages, unemployment benefits, and social insurance, were really the outcome of two important things. One is structural transformation. The modernization of the Turkish economy, the move, the structural change that actually lent itself to formalization and maybe even feminization, even before, one would say, employing those variety of social protection programs that are currently implemented. In other words, formalization was not the cause per se, but the outcome of policies that made sense as the structure of the economy changed. In a series also of well-known articles by Ayşe Bugra and Kalar Kader, they highlighted also, they used economic analysis, but highlighted the historical legacy of state-society relations, the conservative liberalism of the current government, and how that interacted with a more universalist approach due to aspirations of Turkey to join the EU, and how that really had an impact on the current, and these are really highly related to the structural transformation that Turkey. So, we can see that very clearly here, how the share of sectors value added in GDP and GDP growth rate over about 5 or 6 decades, had a big decline in the share of agriculture. The share of industry has been expanding, creating more jobs and creating more of the decent and high quality jobs. In contrast, I think we're all familiar with the resource curse, with the rentier and the semi-rentier legacy that unfortunately still persists, as this new jobs and growth report clearly shows how the formal private sector remains trivial. For example, in the Egyptian economy, the share of informal workers, both inside and outside establishments, has increased, and females are concentrated in still in the public sector and in domestic and family work. Very little absorption in the private sector. Egypt and Tunisia are similar in that. Tunisia has been doing worse in terms of this, since 2011 because of the reliance on tourism activities that faced many disruptions. Egypt, has definitely the construction sector, the real estate sector dominating, and those sectors are not just, and the transport sector, they're not just highly informal, but they also tend to be more male dominated, and their informality makes it really very hard to aim for universal social protection without trying to expand formalization in the other sectors. I mean, this has been highlighted in this report and many others. I think I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, and okay, I need to go up. Right. So, and also I think I have a slide here somewhere on Algeria and Tunisia, who had similar reliance on hydrocarbons, and that continued such that none of these countries have really succeeded in promoting private sector jobs. Most of the jobs are informal and precarious. But of course, with varying degrees. So we see that, the share of the informal sector is the smallest in Turkey. And then, Jordan and Tunisia. And interestingly, you would find that almost the adoption of of those labor market institutions that Insan talked about almost went in that order, the universal adoption in Turkey, followed by Jordan, followed by Tunisia. Egypt's just starting. I know he has in his table that Egypt has unemployment benefits, but actually that's really just on paper. And the minimum wage has only been applied in the public sector only in January, and I serve on the National Council of Wages as an expert advisor. After a lot of resistance due to COVID, did Egypt start adopting that? Morocco maybe still, similar to Egypt, still not quite there in their structural transformation. Now, let me move to the issue of labor market segmentation, and I'll concentrate on gender since, beyond formality, but it is related to formality. Obviously, Turkey had, together with the structural transformation, they had a feminization of their labor force. Their female labor force participation rates are higher than all those MENA countries I mentioned. And they have, the famous U-turn of a reduction as they moved away from agriculture, into industry, and then it's picking up again. However, it needs to be noted that they're still well below the OECD average, even though they joined the G20, but, the OECD average is almost double that of Turkey in terms of female. So the challenges remain, and, the legacy of the past. And the fact that, more women are participating, though, in the labor market do provide strong evidence that the economic and the demographic forces, one would expect with this structural transformation have still, have been taking place in Turkey, but they are ahead. On the gender issue, there is a very strong problem of occupational segregation in North African countries. I use here some of my charts from Egypt that show very clearly that women are highly concentrated in the social services, health and education, the public sector and non-wage work, whereas men are concentrated in those rising but highly informal sectors, construction, and that are often informal. And that's very important when we talk about the differentiation and the type of social assistance and which of the two genders are benefit. It became very clear during the pandemic. This is from the policy brief on Turkey, and these shows the first column here shows the pre-pandemic, and this shows during the pandemic, and these are like the transitions. When employment was hit, it took the form of unemployment for men, but women, were more likely to exit the labor force in Turkey. And of course, Egypt is, very similar. If we look here at, from the COVID monitor data, hardly any women who were unemployed found any work. So there was no transition for those who were unemployed to employment, and much larger percentage transitioned into being out of the labor force from employment when compared, and they became inactive when compared to men. So, any kind of gains pre-pandemic in both Turkey, Egypt, have been eroded, and the worry that it will, that this is something that will continue because, clearly women globally face this difficulty in reconciling unpaid domestic work and care work with paid work outside the home. But in the MENA, it's particularly acute because they have the largest gender disparity in unpaid work, as I've shown. And, in addition, during the pandemic, women faced really very clearly in both their, reporting of subjective well-being and in the data itself, they faced a lot of hardship in, their double burden. And, there was a clearly absence of social assistance, the crisis type or the pre-existing type that would have helped them with this burden. I mean, that takes me to the last, if you like, comments I would like to make on, the minimum wages implementation and their role in playing part of the social protection floors, which according to the ILO definitions, they are nationally defined sets of basic social security guarantees that should ensure at a minimum over the life cycle, so for children, for working age, and for the elderly, that they have access to adequate healthcare and basic income security. And they should be really applied at the national level. So the basic income security, of course, is the type of labor market institutions Insan analyzed for Turkey. And of course, there's always the question of how to fix them, at which level, the definition of welfare and entitlement. And they really need to find meaning and grounding in the proposed tools to secure that this floor is, covered fiscally, administratively, and within the cultural possibilities. Now, these are as a result of the pandemic and this and the discussions in this panel and the macro panel, there is the idea of a new paradigm or a shift of emphasis, and Insan alluded to it. For me, I think that maybe a U-turn is a better definition of what's going on, because, we need to remember that when the MENA region was one of the most equal regions in the world, they had those universal provision of social programs, of subsidies, and the use of in-kind for food security, etc. And we need to remember that this targeting only started with the Washington Consensus, due to the desire to remove subsidies. But now there is this new, of course, Cornwall Consensus, we can talk about, that might be, putting a push again to going to this universal coverage. But let me just call attention to a couple of, if I have a minute, Noha, let me call attention.
I have a minute, Dr. Mona.
Let me call attention to just some of the issues so far. As I said, Tunisia and Jordan, being more formal and closer in their structural transformation to Turkey, have had now quite a few years of implementing minimum wage regimes, and these are before Egypt anyway, who just started imposing it in the private sector this year. And what we notice, of course, is that they in Tunisia you have two types, one for agriculture, one for non-agriculture, and these I show you here nominal wages from this study by Kraft and Hanafi that shows how they have been increasing over time, and one of them is higher. The non-agriculture is higher, which always introduces, of course, trade-offs and issues in terms of the incentives for workers to move from one sector to another. So this is trying to promote structural change away from agriculture. In Jordan, they started making it very limited, a long time ago, 1999, and only in 2006 and 2009 did non-wage workers and domestic workers were included. But until today, there is a different minimum wage, and we can see it here, the difference between the non-Jordanian and the Jordanian and the domestic work type of minimum wage. They're very different according to the study, and there's something to be said, of course, for then segmentation in both Jordan and really Turkey along the formal-informal line, was fueled by the presence of all those refugees, because they mostly work informally, and it is a question whether the design of the minimum wage should then change and offer them the same minimum wage, which might challenge the Syrian refugees who are already finding a hard time to find employment. Nevertheless, the situation is so much better in Jordan and Turkey than it is for them in a country like Lebanon, for example, where they have limited fiscal space and support and all the crises in Lebanon. The status of minimum wages in Egypt is, as I said, that it started being implemented in the private sector, and we're just busy trying to see all of the firms that are trying to postpone its implementation because of the financial difficulties they went through during the pandemic. It's just a monthly wage. It's not differentiated by region or by sector or by group of people, as in the national minimum wage reached 2,400, and there is talk, not confirmed, that because of the devaluation now, it might be increased earlier than usual in July. It might be increased in April along with pensions. Now, the raising of the minimum wage is expected to have a lighthouse or ripple effect, but an issue that there are two issues in the design I would like to end with for the case of Egypt. One is the fact that it might need to be supplemented by targeted active labor market programs that actually worked very well in India in raising the wage in response to the minimum wage in the informal sector, and also trying. They gave this guarantee of 90 days of work for both men and women, and it's a public works program with the government, and that seemed in conjunction with the minimum wage to ensure that it played that ripple effect or lighthouse effect on the informal sector. So this is something to be considered. The other issue, of course, when we think of gender, is that unfortunately, it's at the moment it's just a monthly wage rate. And if it's a monthly wage rate and a minimum wage and not an hourly one, then the incentive for the firms is to employ workers for long hours, and that is a great disincentive for part-time work and for women to benefit from it. So it actually might work against the long-term gender issue we have in Egypt. In conclusion, I believe that structural transformation in Turkey has been the key to the transformation and the formalization and the variety of social protection programs that they're currently implemented. And I think that's the key takeaway for other Arab countries to push in that direction and diversify their economies. I think the issue of labor market segmentation by gender is more than just women falling through the cracks. And now it's the refugee national. It's a long-term structural issue that needs policies that are directed to the care economy, and for that to be integrated in the social protection programs, because that has been clearly missing so far and during the time of crises. And finally, it seems that there is some kind of a U-turn happening in social policies, and we have a long history of using universal subsidies and universal that actually worked quite well in terms of inequality, reducing inequality and poverty. We have a long history to learn from in improving the design. Thank you very much, Noha, and I'm sorry if I spoke too long.
Thank you so very much, Professor Mona Said. That was a wonderful way of wrapping up this great journey, because you just emphasized something that is truly crucial, and that has to do with the fact, as you said it, that formalization is a result of structural change, not the other way around, and hence structural transformation of the economies in MENA should be considered very, very seriously when designing the efficient and resilient responses to the precarity of work in the region. I cannot thank you enough for that, and I particularly feel that the points you made at the end about the segmentation and how segmentation is no longer, as you said, to ignore the fact that there are segments of populations that we can no longer keep out of any social protection solution, primarily refugees. I find that to be very poignant and leaves a lot of room for further research. Thank you all very much for this fantastic panel. Now we have great questions in the question and answer session, as well as some very interesting questions that Professor Masoud put for Professor Insan to take into account as well. The questions we have in the question room, question and answer room, are four. One is the following from Nasruddin Hamouda: is there informal sector in the public sector? And another question from Ragi Asad if the formalization of workers requires the formalization of the enterprise in which they work, how do we deal with the problem of high levels of informality among employers? And this is something that we, of course, heard, particularly in that last intervention from Professor Mona, that there are some leading sectors of economies, such as in Egypt and Tunisia, where indeed the informality of the employers is a problem. So I find Ragi's question to be pertinent for that case, and Professor Insani would have to help us answer that question. There is a third question from Abdel Nasser, and I apologize, Abdel Nasser, that I do not see your last name, so I apologize for that. And you've asked a wonderfully intricate question. I'll summarize it briefly by saying, what about the agricultural sector? It seems that government planners are completely separated from the reality of the agricultural sector, particularly in a country with a large agricultural sector like Egypt. And even the World Bank and the IMF are not providing much attention, Abdel Nasser says, to this particular challenge. What are your thoughts about that? This is alongside the fantastic questions posed by Professor Masoud related to the specificity of success in labor market policies, Professor Insan, if they are contingent upon negotiating power, collective negotiation power, government subsidies in the private sector, and the relationship between minimum wage and the poverty line. I'll stop here and see, we'll start with Professor Insan, if you try to address all or some of these interesting questions, and then see if anyone else from the panel would like to add to your responses. Over to you, Professor Insan.
Thank you very much, Noha. You can hear me, I assume?
Very well.
All right, very good. If I were to try to answer all the questions, especially the long list that Masoud had for me, we'd be here for a very long time, so I'll spare you that outcome. But I do thank him very much for provoking lots of thoughtful comments. I'm going to pick and choose at liberty here. Let me go in the order of my discussants. I thank Vladimir for bringing in a dimension that I left out, lots of data from other countries. That's very helpful. And the distinction that he made between contributory and non-contributory social protection is obviously a very important one. I've been focusing on the former in my presentation. He also showed us how there were vast gender differences. When you looked at labor market outcomes, males seem to be doing better than females in some respects, very much better, and perhaps not contradictory with that. You look at social assistance and it's the females getting social assistance. Now, of course, there are other reasons why females are targeted, because if social assistance goes to females, it reaches the family, as we know. These gender issues were also brought up by Mona. I left them out of my analysis, given my time limits. Now, the causal effects issue, I'd like to share with you. See, I think I have it here. Yeah, let me see if I can do this. All right, perfect. So this is a graph from our minimum wage work, and it shows the difference between two kernel densities. The first one is the last quarter of 2015. The next one is 2016 first quarter. the minimum wage increases by a lot from the black line to the red line, and look at the difference between these two kernel densities. Wages that are around this area that my cursor is moving, around the black line, they're gone, and they're replaced by a big boost in wages near the red line. So there's no question that minimum wage increases impact all wages. This is the lower part of the distribution, but it's a huge, right? There are informal workers here as well as formal workers. So obviously to talk about employment effects, first you have to show that there is this wage effect, and we show it, and then proceed to study the employment effects. Now, we really tried very hard to see adverse employment effects, especially in the case of this really, really large boost in the minimum wage, and couldn't find any. This finding, incidentally, is very much now the accepted norm. You know, work done in recent years in the United States of America and elsewhere, Western European countries, I think convincingly tells us that the negative effects that were alluded to in the earlier literature were probably results of poor methodology, and there don't seem to be very negative effects of minimum wage increases anywhere. Now, I think Masoud's points about gig economy, platform employment models, and so on, the loss of the distinction between self-employment and wage and salary work, this is a very, very important one and needs to be taken seriously. I haven't had the chance to talk about that. His point about UBI is also well taken. I think, if you look at the 2008 World Bank report, there the efficiency focus is in a really micro setting. You're targeting groups of people and so on, while as UBI, of course, you're looking at the entire economy. I mean, all the population, all the citizens, where they work or not. And so consequently, the way efficiency evaluation is done is different. And I take his word that UBI can provide efficiency when you look at it in this broader context. Let me turn to a very important comment that Mona made about whether or not formalization is something that happened by itself. I mean, she didn't say that. I mean, obviously, it doesn't really happen by itself. Let me see if I can find this slide here. All right. I didn't have the chance to talk about this. Now, obviously, yeah, formalization is a consequence of many things, other changes. But if you look at how it happened, the key to it was the reduction in the taxes on employment. You can see that in this graph, okay? So in our work, we start in 2005, this red dot, and even after that, it goes down. But compared to where the taxes stood before 2000, there are huge improvements. Now, of course, these taxes are a great impediment to formalization. But there were other issues. Raghi very importantly underscored that formalization of workers is one thing, and then that usually requires that the enterprises come under scrutiny as well. That's true. So there were these sticks initially, harsh monetary penalties if firms, however small, are caught engaging in informal contracts. But then by providing them access to credit and employment tax subsidies, and saying, well, if you start behaving better, then you'll get all these benefits and so on. Those types of incentives worked exceptionally well. So yes, formalization was the result of many changes, but obviously taxes are directly linked with formalization. Now, someone from the audience asked about informal public sector workers. Yes, this is an anomaly that has emerged in Turkey. Oops, this is not what I wanted to show you. Where is my slide? Here it is. Let me see if I can go to that relevant picture. A picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say. So this is the one I want to show you. These are the changes over time. So yeah, on the right-hand side, at the bottom of the panel, you see the public sector informal workers. These really didn't exist until around 2006-07 or so. But by 2015, it was remarkable. A lot of these people are actually women, as you can see from the red graph.
In fact, I don't think we can see your slides.
You can't see the slide?
No, you're not sharing.
I'm not sharing. Thank you, Mona. I meant to, and I hope that I'm sharing now, or am I?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, very good. So there we go. Informal sector, public, bottom row, and the right, the column on the right-hand side. So you see that there are a lot of women there. That's the red graph. Below minimum wage, these are women who are actually getting social assistance for taking care of the elderly or handicapped youth. So this was a very controversial policy change. At some point, 2011 or so, the government started considering them employed. So that's one reason. In the case of the blue distribution, males, these are these paramilitary forces engaged in Kurdistan to pro-government defenders of the local areas, so to speak. They are informally employed, turns out, even though they're on government salary. So if you ask them, they're working in the government sector, but yet they do not have social security. And then there were some other occupations of that sort. It's an anomaly, but very interesting. Thanks for bringing it up. I had the chance to share my findings with you. So to wrap up, I thank my discussants very much for picking on things that I left out. As I told you in the beginning, it's a vast topic and it's very difficult to come up with a good assessment in 20 minutes, even though I took 30 minutes, I fell short. Thank you, Noha, for granting me the extra time. Thank you, my dear friends who provided the discussion. And also thank you, Ibrahim, for inviting me. It was a great opportunity to share with you a particular vision of how this agenda can be served. So let me stop.
Thank you very, very much. I am now struggling with something here, and I will have to ask you all for your forgiveness. I am struggling with the fact that I wanted very much the rest of the panel to take a minute or so each to just give us the final thoughts. But then we lost our translator because the professional allotment of time is over. So if you want to, please restrict yourselves to just 1 minute final thought, knowing that you will not be translated into Arabic for our Arabic speaking audience. And if you want to give up that privilege to say anything, that would be also very welcome. Then I would turn it over to Dr. Ibrahim Al-Badawi for a thought. May I ask for a virtual raise of hand if you do not want to say anything anymore, if you do not want to. Ah, there is someone still on interpretation. Fantastic, fantastic, fabulous. Thank you for that. I will give in a reversed order our panelists a chance for one final thought, because everything in this panel was so provocative, so powerful, and in need of many more hours of conversation. And after we finish the panelists, I'll give Professor Ibrahim Al-Badawi also a chance to wrap us up. And then I want a minute to say something. As a non-economist, all of you have excused yourselves in different ways. For me, I am the even non-economist altogether in that panel. We'll start with Mona, move on to Professor we'll start with Vladimir, move on to Professor Masaud, and end with Mona. Vladimir, a minute, please, no more. I think we lost Vladimir until we figured that one out. Professor Masoud, would you like to give us your final thought?
Yes, thank you. Well, just very briefly, thank you, Ensan, for addressing, I mean, in the short time that we have, we really cannot get into nitty-gritties. But basically, the point I was making was really, for example, minimum wage really it becomes meaningful if you put it in the context of wage setting processes. And I find it very strange, the behavior, the difference between the public sector and private sector distributions relative to the minimum wage, both in terms of its position, but also in terms of change over time. And I think we cannot really disentangle, for example, distributional effects if we don't understand what's going on. What are the differences in these? And it's very odd that, for example, private sector, the majority of workers are really squeezed more towards the minimum wage. Now, if you look at, for example, your public sector pay, you'll see that between 2005 and 2021, there is a big squeeze on the top part of the distribution. I mean, visually, I just looked at it. So in a way, that has nothing to do also, or maybe has something to do with not much to do with minimum wage. So that was the point I was making, that really distributional effects, yeah, we need to put it in that context. But anyway, thank you very much. And I enjoyed very much your presentation. Thank you.
Mona, over to you.
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate or add to what has been said so far on minimum wages, addressing Ragi's question and Insan's answer to it. How do we deal with the problem of formalizing the enterprises themselves, who are very reluctant? And I think, what we were trying to demonstrate in this panel was that perhaps there is a long-term and there is a short-term solution. The long-term solution is, when the whole economy moves forward in a way that actually generates those kind of jobs that are going to be formal. So the enterprises are going to be, wanting to gain from the benefits of formality. And that's when the carrot and the stick and the taxation incentives that Insan talked about. At the moment, I think it is, he had to rely on taxation, and taxation is a very weak, the ability to tax is very weak in a lot of those countries at the moment. So they're neither effective as incentives or disincentives because they're simply not enforced enough. In the short term, I believe, that, it's worth really trying to examine this lighthouse effect or the, trying to combine minimum wage implementation with other active labor market policies that would provide a signal to the informal sector that this should be the going wage. And it raises the expectations on both the employer and the employee side, whether they're formal and informal. And I think Raghi himself has been a great proponent of trying to pass an hourly wage, minimum wage, because a lot of those workers in the informal sector work by the hour. So if they the monthly wage of 2,400 or now 2,700 even, it's not going to mean much. But if this is if there is a clear hourly wage, I think this can play the signaling effect. But these are all short-term measures, while informality is so pervasive. And my view is that none of those social protection policies are going to take care of this, without the actual transformation in product markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mona. Dr. Ibrahim Al-Badawi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Noha, for such a wonderful and effective, kind of moderation of this most interesting session. Insan, you have really produced a very, without any exaggeration, a captivating presentation, really. It's really great. And of course, the lead commentators, Mona, Vladimir, and Masoud. Very grateful for you all. I think this 28th annual conference, I think I see it as a landmark in terms of our future direction of research. And I take I think the conclusion that Danny Roderick this morning or this afternoon came up with, that the future direction of development strategy is such that you won't be able to generate, high productivity and high labor absorption because of the impact of technology and digital, digitech and all that, and the global value chains and so on, makes it very difficult for success without actually combining both growth strategies and social policy, including labor market policies and social protection. I think as research network, we need to think very hard about how we, kind of think through our future direction of research to be able to respond to this challenge and not to work in silos. And obviously, specialization is very important so that you can actually go deep and develop something rigorous. But I think it's very important now actually to start think about how to do full employment macroeconomics. It's a very challenging but very intriguing line of research, and I think also that, what's her name, Carmen Reinhardt, Professor Carmen Reinhardt, she also made something similar to this effect. And I think now we're hearing in this conversation about what it takes actually to do structural transformation that can actually generate the kind of labor market outcomes and social protection outcomes that are sustainable and meaningful. So I think all of us need to reflect upon all of these contributions, and tomorrow we will be actually having a policy session, where some of us who have had the opportunity to actually, swim into some uncharted waters of the vagaries of politics, like myself and also some other former ministers, will talk about their experience, on how to generate growth in an environment of high social mobilization and shrinking fiscal space. We'll hear from a former minister from Morocco, and a former minister from Jordan, And I think it will be quite interesting to see how we can actually also connect and generate some sort of an uptake from research to policy on these issues. I don't want to extend my presentation, especially for my Egyptian friends, because Egypt and Senegal have already started playing for the World Cup. And so without further ado, I'd like to thank you all again and have a nice evening and see you tomorrow, inshallah, as we say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for staying late. A special thanks for the interpreters for staying with us over time. This is a great area for further research, and ERF is so well poised to play a pivotal role in that area with all of the issues you have raised. And I'm particularly appreciative to all of you who are looking towards the future with its enormous challenges facing the MENA region in a world going through a lot of deep transformation right now. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for a wonderful wrap up, and go and watch the game. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noha.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Lovely to see all of you. Bye.
Thank you, Mona. Lovely to see you.